Hi, everybody. My name's Sarah. I'm a creative technologist with a background in mechanical engineering, and I'm currently completing an MFA at the Parsons Design and Technology program. My thesis project, My Grandmother's Bedroom, is an interactive VR experience that explores personal memory, intergenerational connection, and the way physical spaces preserve identity. Users engage with the digital recreation of my grandmother Barbara's bedroom, interacting with her personal belongings that tell the story of her life and my relationship with both her and her space. I conceptualized this project a little over a year ago. I was tasked with coming up with an idea for a semester-long project, and I was really interested in this idea of how spaces can be reflective of the people who inhabit them. And I wanted to explore the potential of preserving these spaces. When trying to explain this concept to others, I kept going back to my grandma's room as an example, and eventually it clicked for me that her room would be the perfect subject. My grandma Barbara lived with my parents and I for 17 years. I had no siblings, but she was basically my third parent and best friend, and I spent a lot of time with her in her room while I was growing up. She passed away almost 8 years ago, but her room is in nearly the same state that it was when she was alive, and her presence can still very much be felt, both through my own memories, but also the sheer number of artifacts, furniture, photos, and other unique objects that she collected throughout her life. I decided to recreate the space digitally as a method of preserving it, but you might ask, why do it in VR? Well, I wanted to recreate the experience of stepping into the physical space, really feeling the intimacy of the room without actually being able to go there. And the other benefit of VR is that it gives people the opportunity to closely interact with and hold the objects in the space, which is not something you would be able to do in a typical museum environment, for example. So a little bit about how I constructed the digital environment. It was really important for me to authentically recreate the space as much as possible, and there was only so much that could be done with pre-made assets. So using 3D scanning for much of the furniture, where it was important to preserve the topology and texture, as you can see in the bed in the top right corner. And I also created custom models to recreate specific objects that I wanted represented, such as the vanity that you can see in the bottom two photos. Left one is the real version, right one is the one that I custom modeled in Blender, and then used a texture, an image of the vanity as a texture, because this is a type of object that you wouldn't be able to scan since it's metallic. And it was this same technique that I used to recreate most of the photos that you can see on the walls. With the exception of a few items, everything you see in the experience is laid out exactly as it is in the real space. My grandma made this easy for me in the way that she put the photos on her wall. For example, one wall is entirely black and white photos. Another corner just has photos of me. And this made it this easy to create the interactions, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So because there's so much going on in this small space, I needed some sort of visual cue to guide the user through the narrative. Glowing lights invite the user to interact either by hovering over and clicking on larger objects or grabbing small objects such as photos. When they do, it triggers an audio narrative related to the object. They can listen to the audio while they examine the object in their hands or simply let themselves be immersed in the space while they listen. I spent a while thinking about how to teach users how to interact with the space and also how to let them track their progress through the experience. And I want to do so without breaking the immersion, so it had to be something that was integrated into the environment. My grandmother always kept a desk calendar that she would write her appointments on, so I decided to recreate this calendar, but instead of tracking months, it tracks segments of the experience and the objects that people interact with. This calendar serves as the anchor point of the space. Users are dropped into the environment, given the opportunity to look around, and then are invited to interact with the calendar on the desk. By ripping off pages, they're introduced to the experience and the interaction mechanics. And then they turn to the first chapter and are invited to interact with the photo on the desk right in front of them. So the audio narratives that users listen to include both my personal memories and family history and are retold by myself and my mother. The narrative is really follows my own personal journey of discovery about my grandmother's life, um, the context for which I really didn't fully understand until I started researching for this project. It starts with my childhood memories, simple sensory moments tied to familiar objects, her jewelry box that I admired, the rug that I used to lay down on while we would watch old movies together. As users explore deeper, the story expands. Through photos and heirlooms, they uncover parts of her life I only learned about as an adult. Growing up poor in Brooklyn, her family's history of Jewish migration, and the shifts in class and stability over time. What seems at first like a small personal room gradually reveals a complex intergenerational story. And by the end, the space takes on a new meaning, just as it did for me. The stories that users will hear are sometimes only loosely related to the objects they're tied to. More abstract connections invite users to reflect on how memory and meaning aren't always tidy or linear. So, for example, when the user clicks on a photo of my great grandfather's bar mitzvah, this is what they'll hear.
My grandfather and his brother at their bar mitzvahs, Russia.
What year do you think that was?
Well, let's see. My grandfather was born in 1901. He came before he was 13. So that would have to have been 1914. Okay, so my grandfather was one of either triplets or they were twins in another one. I know you've heard this story. There was the great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother. So when it came time to come to the country, to America, they came to the boat and one of the children was sick. And the guards wouldn't let them on the boat. So the old bubby, said she would stay back, take care of the kid, and everybody else come to America. So I'm not pretty sure my grandfather was one of the ones that came to America. I don't think he was the one left behind. But when a kid was well and it came time for them to come to the States, and she knew she was going to have some shit with the guards, she came and they gave her some shit, and she pulled out a bottle of water this big. And she said, "You see this? This is poison. And if you don't let me on that boat, I'm going to drink this right here." That same old lady, I believe, was the one who they used to use irons and stuff right on the stove. Mm-hmm. It heated. I think she burned her dress and it went on fire and she burned to death.
This is one of the many examples of the stories that I heard growing up about my family, but it wasn't until I put them all together in this project that I was able to fully understand my grandmother's life.
That's
Next slide. So as for feedback, I'm pretty in the pretty late stages of this project, but what I'm currently struggling on is how to guide users through a linear narrative in a confined space. Considering that because it's a real space and I can't move the objects around to suit the story, nor can I really limit access to parts of the room, I'd love some tips on adapting a story to an existing space and directing the attention of the user and pacing of the narrative. I'd also love for this work to live on past my thesis exhibition. So I'd love to hear about potential avenues for evolving this work or having it exhibited in some form. And lastly, this work evolved rather unexpectedly. I didn't set out with a particular career path in mind. I didn't know anything about VR and I'd never used Unity or Blender. I just really picked up the skills I needed to develop this project. So I'm still looking for clarity on where I could go from here. So based on what you've seen of this work, where might my work fit as a designer? Thank you. All I have.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. That's fantastic. Okay, all right, let's go. We'll go to conversation mode. So which of our experts has first thoughts?
I can go first. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing this beautiful project. I think it's amazing. I wish your grandmother could see what you did with all those memories. It made me really emotional seeing that, how much profound influence she had on her life and really validating that. I think the way you staged it and created it is so tactile. It's beautiful, it's personal, and then revealing the background layer that this is really bridging multi-generational history, right? Like everything right now, I mean, I live in New York City, everything is monoculture and these little bubbles. So creating bridges for multi-generational incentives, I think is really, really contemporary right now and much, much needed. So we understand and learn from other generations. I also think it's a form of mourning probably for you, for your grandmother in a really constructive way, In terms of your questions, how you can guide an audience in a static environment, you could do it like, for example, Sleep No More does it. They use affordances in the space to guide attention. So you could have subtle lighting shifts. The audience will follow the lighting and look where the lighting is. If some light streak is coming through the window and landing somewhere, you will immediately guide the audience's attention to it. You can also do it with ambient background sound that is directional in the space. They will follow that. And then you almost, even though it's a three-dimensional space, you almost create little chapters. First, they look in this section, or they look in this section, or if they turn, maybe then algorithmically your sense of hierarchy, the way the sound guides it, could change. How this could evolve, I could imagine perhaps this is just one memory in a bigger sequence of memories. What's so nice is to really reveal influences you may have had in your life through different memories that you might be staging. Your grandmother might just be one of them, you know? Or there could be a platform where people share very influential memories, and you could exchange. If this was a very profound memory for you, what would it be for other people? And why is it so profound? And the meta level of the exchange, I would find particularly interesting in that. I could also see that you create this in real life in a museum to make it more tangible, and people actually look at the room. There are historical objects and manifestations, right? So yeah, if you have any more questions, let me know.
Thank you.
Jasmine. Carla, it sounded, you had something you wanted to share?
Oh yeah. I mean, first of all, I want to applaud. I also come from a background of mechanical engineering, and I want to applaud you for finding your creative path. I know what that's like, and applaud you for being scrappy about. I think that's what's happening now with a lot of us is we're doing Blender and Touch Designer and Python and figuring out how all those pieces go together. And I think you've put it together really beautifully. I was going to suggest that you give yourself permission to not be completely literal with every aspect of it. I think sometimes we make rules for ourselves around our designs, and so just be kind to yourself and give yourself that permission. And then I would suggest some device. I think what Jasmine has been suggesting is really great around following the light or having some light. I was also going to suggest having certain treatments, like perhaps there's a lighted or glowing frame around the things that are interactive, because I do perceive that that may be something that could be confusing for the viewer and maybe frustrate them if they feel like, well, I thought I could interact with this and this looks just like this. So if you can find some device to make, if it's a frame or some kind of color coding or some kind of glow that distinguishes some objects from the other objects, that would be really helpful. And then finally, in terms of, how you wind up finding your audience and sharing this with the world, I would suggest looking into artist grants from different foundations, and perhaps finding a way, figure out, this is your very personal story, which I think is very beautiful, but figure out what threads in that story can connect with others in the world, perhaps with similar heritage or with similar family structures, or and what is that story that can touch others through their own stories.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry. Go on, and then we'll go to the next. Yeah, of course, Tom, go for it.
First of all, really lovely presentation, and I really enjoyed the experience and the storytelling here. It's incredibly authentic, and it just feels like a very modern representation of like object permanence. It's almost like this like living sarcophagus in a way, in this like really beautiful way, and so I really appreciate that. I think for your question about guiding the guest through a linear experience, one thought I had is I wonder if you even need it to be linear. There's kind of this really awesome organized chaos to the room where you can kind of almost jump into different points in a person's life that I find really fascinating about it. So that would be my first kind of thought. But I think if you do really want to do it linear, I almost wonder also if you break up the items almost by era, or maybe even the way that you experience them through your own life. I think you said you've interacted with this room like over the course of maybe 17 years. So maybe, and I'm sure you perceived it in different ways over that time. So maybe changing the perception is a good way to guide the narrative in a way. I think that could be kind of interesting and different. So again, just thanks for sharing. Really cool project.
Thank you.
I love it. Okay, so I think we're gonna move on to Adi. All right, I'm gonna jump in with one thing. I was just gonna say that, like, if you're looking for things that are sort of nonlinear, immersive theater like Punch Drunk and Sleeping More and Then She Fell, those are all very, very good examples of the like nonlinear. For linear storytelling or things that are sequenced, definitely look at games. And look at game mechanics, because it's like a lot of that has to do with like locking and unlocking and revealing and gating and that there's that whole world has a lot of they've figured out a lot there. So okay, and Julian, you're going to get to chime in top of the next